Alright guys, so now that we have our UI set up, at least the initial HTML, we're going to start to work on the JavaScript. So this input here is going to have an event listener, and it's going to listen for a key up event. So let's go to our app.js file, which is our basically our entry point, and let's go ahead and say search input, and we're going to create a variable here. I'm going to call it search user, and we're going to set it to the document dot get element by ID, and it has an ID of search user. I'm pretty sure. Let me just double check that. Yeah, right here, search user. And we want to then add an event listener, so we'll go down here and we'll say search input event listener. And we'll do that by taking that variable of search user and then just creating add event listener. And then we're going to say we're going to listen for a key up. Okay, and then I'll just put an arrow function here, and that'll take in the event parameter. And then we need to decide what we want to do here. So first of all, we want to get the text that is being typed in. So let's say get input text, and we'll create a variable for that. We'll call it user text and set it to the event object dot target and then the value. Okay, so whatever value is being typed in. All right, and we want to make sure that it's not blank. So let's say if user text is not equal to nothing, then we want to continue on here. And we want to then make an HTTP call to GitHub. Now this is going to be done through our Github.js file. So for now, let's just go ahead and console.log and make sure that we can actually get the user text. So go ahead and do that, and we'll hit F12 over here to open up our console and start to type, and you can see that it's logging what we type. So far so good. So we'll save that. We'll go over to Github.js, and we're going to create a class here. We're going to use ES6 classes, and we're going to have a constructor. Now remember, I said if you're making, I think it's 100 or more requests per hour, you're going to need your API key and your secret. So we're going to go over here. We're going to first grab the client ID, and I'm going to add that as a property here. So this dot client underscore ID equals, and then we're going to put in that number. Yours should be different. And then same with the client secret. We'll say this dot client underscore secret, and we'll set that to that number. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's go under the constructor, and we're going to create a get user method. And this is going to be similar to the easy HTTP version 3 that we created, where we used promises with a sync await. So we're going to create an asynchronous function by saying async and call it get user, and then we'll pass in here a user, and let's say const profile response. Now we're actually going to be getting we're going to be making two requests within this function. One is going to be to get the user itself. One is going to be to get the repos of the user. There's two different URLs with this API that we need. So one is going to be api.github.com/users. Users / and then whatever the user name. In this case, I'll just put mine, and it'll give us all this info. And then we also want to make one for the repos, which would be the same URL and then /repos, and that will give you a list of all their repositories. Okay, so this is going to work a little different. That's why I'm calling this profile response and not just response, because we're going to have two different. We'll have profile response and repo response, but we're going to work with the profile first. So let's set this to await fetch, and then we want to pass in here the URL. I'm going to use backticks, and we actually want this URL here, except we want to change Brad Traversy, unless you always want to get the same user, which of course you don't. You want to change that to the user variable or the user parameter that's being passed in. Okay, now we're also going to have to add on the client ID and client secret. So right after user, let's put a question mark to add a query string here of client underscore ID, and we'll set that equal to template literal, which will be this dot client ID. Okay, so yeah, that should work. And then we're going to do an ampersand here because we want another query string, and that's going to be client secret. And we're going to set that equal to the template literal of this dot client secret. Okay, so that's our fetch URL. And then we're going to go down below here, and we're going to say const, and we want to get the profile data, and we'll set this to await, and then profile response, and then .json. Okay, that'll give us the JSON data, and then we simply want to return that. All right, now I'm not going to return just the profile data. I'm going to return an object because, again, we're also going to be returning the repos from here as well. And this is what's great about promises and using a sync await as opposed to callbacks. If we use callbacks, we'd have to have one callback, get the response, and then have another one with the repo getting the repos. So this is it allows us to format asynchronous operations really nicely. So let's send back profile, and we'll set this to profile data. Okay, actually we'll just call this profile. And in ES6 Plus, you can actually, if you're going to do this, so if both of these are going to be the same profile, you can actually get rid of this one and just do that. Okay, and it'll return this. It's the same as saying profile : profile. So let's go ahead and save that. And then we'll go back to our app.js. And now this is where we actually want to call that function we just created. Let's go to index.html first. I just wanted to make sure that we have our Github.js and all that stuff, which we do. So we should have no problem. So let's say make HTTP call. So we'll say let's say GitHub dot get user. We're going to pass in that user text from the form, and that's going to return a promise. So we'll say .then, and that'll give us the data, and then we'll set an arrow function here. And what do we want to do now? We want to actually, you know what we'll do is we'll console log data. So we'll go back to our application. Let's put in a B here. GitHub is not defined, and the reason for that is we didn't instantiate it. Okay, so GitHub is actually a class, so we have to go up here and we have to initialize it or instantiate it. So let's say init GitHub by saying const GitHub equals new GitHub. Alright, so it's just instantiating this class right here. So let's save that. Let's see, const GitHub equals new GitHub. What am I missing here? So we have it included here. Is this saved? Is this saved? Oh, I have a uppercase H right here. Let's change that. There we go. So now that error's gone. And let's go ahead and add a B. And we get a response. Notice that we get an object with profile. Now this is coming from right here. We're returning profile with our response, our JSON response, which has all of the data for the user with the username or the login of B. And then every time I type, You'll see if we go down here, now we have one for the BR user. So we're getting the data from GitHub, which is exactly what we want to be doing. Now, when we reach a user that doesn't exist, so let's say Brad TR, here we go. So this user doesn't exist. So let's look at what we have in profile. We have a message that says not found. So that's what I'm going to actually search for to see if there's an actual user with this, whatever is currently in this in the input box. All right, so we're going to go back to app.js, and then let's do an if statement here. It'll be an if else. So we're going to say if data dot profile dot message is equal to not found, which we just saw that's what it returns, then we want to show an alert that says the user's not found. Okay, now this is going to happen in our UI.js file in the UI library, which we haven't created yet, but I'm just putting the conditional here for now. Other than that, then we want to show the profile, okay, which will also happen through the UI.js, the UI class. So we're going to go ahead and stop here. Oh, actually, one more thing. This if statement where we're saying if there's nothing in here, we also want to put on an else to that. Okay, so if that's true, then we want to clear the profile. Because if we're typing something in here and we're getting a profile, if we go back and make it empty, I want the profile to disappear, and that'll happen through the UI as well. Okay, so now that we can actually fetch the data, let's go ahead and save this. We can fetch the data. In the next video, we're going to start to work on bringing it into the UI.